Hello, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, 800 million Indians living in poverty will soon have the right to food under new legislation. But why are critics saying it's just a political ploy? You know, I can't do this job without our digital producer Malika Bilal. She is here looking out for your live feedback. This topic, hot topic in India, been trending on Twitter. Our community have asked us to do it. Community, hope you're happy now. So where is our community taking us today?
Right. We've gotten a fair amount of comments on this. People are really talking about it. And a lot of what I'm seeing online is that people are apprehensive, especially Indians themselves. I'm going to play a video comment here from someone who has several questions. And he summarizes what many people are tweeting us. Have a listen.
Hi, this is Girish Nair from Chennai, India. Well, I don't see the food security bill going very far for three simple points. Point number one, we don't even seem to have a clear understanding of how many people actually fall into the category that deserves food security. Number two, the government doesn't seem to have put any system in place that ensures that the food actually reaches the right people across this country. And number three, timing. I question the timing of bringing this bill just before the elections.
A lot of questions there, and we hope to bring a lot of answers. But for those of you at home, if you have your own questions or comments, tweet them to us at #AJStream.
Now, while you're tweeting us, why not follow the stream on Twitter as well? You can see the stories making news around the world and check out some of our exclusive web content. And while I'm online, this program note as well for our viewers and our followers in India. We are hosting our India Open editorial coming up on October the 11th. So, if there are any stories out there that you would like to see us cover about India, tweet us using the hashtag #OpenEditorial. India's food security bill was signed into law this September after the ruling Congress party pushed it through Parliament using an executive order. There are specific provisions in the law for women and children, making sure that India's most vulnerable will now have a right to food. Congress leader Sonia Gandhi has said that it's the first step in her party's goal to wipe out hunger and malnutrition. But critics say the timing of the bill is suspect as India heads into an election year. There's also concern over whether the government can actually afford the more than $18 billion price tag, while others doubt the food distribution system will be able to carry such a huge burden. So, as the new scheme is rolled out around the country, is food a right for 2/3 of India's population, or are people's empty stomachs being used for electoral gain? To help us talk about this from Ahmedabad, India, we have to discuss the food security bill, we have Harsh Manda. He is a director of the Centre for Equity Studies, and he also helped draft the food security bill. In our Google Plus hangout from New Delhi, Devinder Sharma, he's a food and trade policy analyst. Also in the hangout, Mani Shankar Prasad is a blogger and environment consultant in Mumbai. And from Bangalore, Nitin Pai, he is the director of the Taksha Shila Institution. It's great to have you all here in the stream, gentlemen. Let me start with Mani first of all. Mani, I'm going to give you 1 minute for an elevator pitch for why you think the food security bill, is such a good idea. Sell it to me.
When market-based mechanisms are not perfect, point number one. Secondly, welfare is often the last resort of the poor. And thirdly, according to the National Sample Survey Organization data of 2004, 76% of Indian households are calorie insufficient. So these are the 3 points, and which I have to make at the moment. Yeah.
So we'll see how convinced the rest of our guests are. Devinder, you've also got a minute maximum to do your pitch for why you think the food security bill in India is not such a good idea.
Well, I think first of all, let me make it very clear that India does need a food security bill. And after 65 years of independence, if we have brought in a food security bill, I think that is something which is very important, significant. But having said that, the way the bill has come about, I think I'm very disappointed. I think it's an opportunity lost. Why? Because feeding a country like India, you mentioned such a huge population to be fed. We are still not out of our what we call as a refugee syndrome. When the refugees need, whenever refugees come in any country, they need emergency aid, and that's the kind of thing. 5 kilos and 3 kilos or 4 kilos, whatever you are trying to give them. But I thought, any country which really wants to feed its population, there's a Chinese saying which says that if you want to feed a man for a day, give him fish. But if you want to feed a man for his lifetime, teach him how to catch fish. I think that should have been the priority. We can't go on providing food every month or every year in the manner that has been spelled out in the food security bill. I think it is not a good bill.
Well, Harsh, you heard Devinder just mention the term that he coined, the refugee syndrome. Some of our community members are chiming in here about what this means for the actual people on the ground, the people who need this food. There's a tweet here from Sundar who says, ask any one of your panelists whether they've ever stood in the queue for a kilogram of rice. So how dire is the situation? Can you paint that picture for us of what hunger in India really looks like?
Actually, I think that whether food security bill, whether all we should be doing is distributing food, as Devinder said, that's not my claim. My claim is that at least 230 million people sleep hungry every night. Every second child in India is malnourished, and the way to solve the problem has many aspects. But meanwhile, children's brains and bodies are being formed today. Life with hunger is something that we can be detached about if we don't live with it. I've spent many years working with and people living with hunger, and there's a certain desperation in not being able to feed your child, having no other options, and I think that it is the desperation of want that this bill is addressing. Distributing food is not a solution in any permanent kind of way. But while we work out other solutions, while we work on many of the things that Devinder feels is necessary, and many others as well, meanwhile, it is the duty of the state to legally be bound to ensure that no one sleeps hungry.
So Nitin, that's quite a compelling argument, the idea that no one should sleep hungry while you work out a better way of feeding the poor and the hungry in India. Are you buying that?
See, first of all, I want to make it clear that 800 million people are not actually poor, and 800 million people in India don't actually need food security in terms of entitlement to food from the government. The number of poor people in the country, which last counted by the government, is about 260 or 270 million people. Yet, the food security bill attempts to cover 822 million people. So you've got to ask the question, why is it that when you have a situation where only 270 million people are absolutely in need of help, you are going in and providing subsidized food grains to 822 million. So there is some question which people like Mr. Mandar and his colleagues have to answer.
All right,
but
so Nitin, pause for a second, because you asked that question and Harsh is here, and Harsh helped draft the legislation. So Harsh, can you respond to Nitin?
Hello?
Yes, about basically Nitin was saying that if 800 million Indians will be supported by the food security bill, there aren't that many hungry Indians in India, so maybe it might be a little bit of overkill. Hopefully I'm summarizing him correctly.
It's a huge overkill.
The poverty line that is officially used is hugely minimalist. It talks about people living on 25 rupees a day in a village, and about 32 rupees a day in the city. It's much closer to a starvation line rather than a poverty line. in India's calorific deficiency is much higher than that. And if you take a $2, which is a much more reasonable poverty line, $2 a day, something
why not $3, Mr. Mandar? Why not $4? Why not $5? Why do you need an arbitrary number of $2? I think we've got to make that.
Nitin, it's easy to be dismissive if you don't live a life of poverty. Try living on.
It's very easy to take.
Try living on 31 rupees a day.
I've got to interrupt you here. You said some very nice things. None of us will debate. You can have your say. Yeah, I'll wait for you to finish.
No, just hear me out. And no, I think as a society we need to agree upon what is the minimum decent life for every human being to live. And when we we've achieved very high, we are the second largest, fastest growing economy in the world. When we grow enough food, we have 80 million tons in our warehouses. There is the need to have a less basic, less minimalist definition of poverty, and $2 is globally accepted as a decent level. It's still very minimal, but it is how much we feel a person should have.
Okay, Nitin.
Yeah. See, I think I don't disagree with anybody who says that there are desperately needy people in the country, and it's behoves society to be able to provide for those desperately needy. But let's remember that every rupee and every kg of food grain we give to the desperately needy, we're actually taking that from somebody else. Now the question arises is, why do we have an arbitrary definition of 270 million poor people, and then a whole lot of other people decide that $2 is the limit? And then my question is, why not $2.50? Why not $3? Why not $4? We could always say that anybody who earns less than $5 a day is actually poor. What can you really buy in $5? We can make that argument for $10. $10 is extremely poor. What can you buy in $10? So I think you've got to draw the line somewhere, and that line can't be pick and choose. You say, we draw the line at 270 million for poverty, but hey, for this food security bill, it's got to be $2 a day, and you've got to give it to 822. See, I think there is an element of intellectual dishonesty which is connected with this. I totally agree with Mr. Mandar that we have to provide for the needy, but we have to do it in a way that is honest, that is fair, and that actually takes into consideration the incentives of the people to actually produce more and grow the economy. We are now in a situation where there is a huge amount of tension as to why are we giving subsidized food grains to 600 million people who might not actually need it, and where is this money coming from?
Okay.
Is this money well spent?
Okay, Nitin, take a pause. Mani, go ahead.
Well, while policy analysts and economists figure out the numbers, there are poor people who sleep hungry every single night, and they are people, and they do not understand statistical logic, and something has to be done for the people on the ground. Well, the bill is a start, and further amendments can be further made in the future. I would certainly believe.
Isn't that a ridiculous argument? The ridiculous argument says that the poor person doesn't understand statistics, so let's give food grains to people who don't deserve it. I mean, that's ridiculous, and I think if that is the kind of an argument which you have to use taxpayers' funds for, then I think people who have promoted that argument have a lot to answer for.
Well, this is something which I think is not fair to say that poor are merely statistical objects. But I think it's also, let's be very clear that India's poverty line is the most stringent in the world. In the kind of poverty line that we have defined all these years, I think this is not actually a subject for the basic food security issue that we talk about. But nevertheless, since it cropped up, India's poverty line, if 28 rupees or 25 rupees, as Harsh said, a human being for 1 day, I think you can't even feed a cow in 1 day. That if you're a farmer, you can't even feed a cow. Now there need for two lines. The present hunger of the present poverty line should actually be called as the hunger or the starvation line, and there should be another line which should be poverty line, which I think is another committee Arjun Sen Gupta committee had said sometimes back that 77% population of India cannot spend more than 20 rupees a day. Now that should be a problem.
Gentlemen, let me just ask you just to hold tight for one moment. Gentlemen, just hold tight for... What is foremost important is that the country has to feed its hungry people, and that is somewhere the effort has to be made. And my argument is that perhaps doling or providing a dole is not the better way. There could have been a better way to encourage people to grow their own food, to go become self-reliant in addressing hunger. Okay, gentlemen, take a pause, all four of you, because this is an interesting debate and the community want to join in as well.
And they do. And one of the things that they're asking is whether or not this bill is too ambitious. There's a Facebook comment here from Fardin who says, you can't promise what you don't have. What India doesn't have is enough food, and it won't be getting anytime soon. But Manny, there's also a Facebook comment on the other hand from Tarun who says India has enough grain, but it's rotting. The government would rather have that amount rot than distribute freely. So is this an issue of supply, or is this an issue of things not going to where they're supposed to go because of corruption and other problems in between?
Well, the system has got immense issues as far as cold storage infrastructure is concerned, and the supply chain isn't perfect. So Mr. Johari's comment is right on the mark, but we certainly need robust food security legislation as a start. We have to start somewhere in order to feed our poor, and that's the main point. While we contest over stats and logic and everything else, we need to start somewhere, and I believe that this bill at least makes a head start in that particular direction.
So bearing that in mind, I've got a really interesting ad on my laptop here. It's from the Congress Party, and it's epic. What the promise is epic. Hunger will be history. I just want everybody who's outside of India to understand what it is that the food bill is offering. Nitin, can you just give me a very quick summary?
See, I think the whole idea is to cover 67% of the population, of the number of households with subsidized food grain of certain types, and the central government has an allocation, and the state governments are allowed to redefine the beneficiaries and add in their own allocations. That's what it generally works like. But I just want to quickly pick up something which we discussed previously and set that context. See, a lot of problems we have now is because a lot of people in government, including the people at the National Advisory Council who drafted this, think that the poverty line is a selection line. The poverty line is like body temperature. It tells you how well the economy is doing. It's like inflation. It tells you what is the level of deprivation in the country. But the people in government have decided to use the poverty line as a selection line to determine who's going to, who's entitled to get subsidized food grain. Now, when you go out and say that, look, anybody who earns less than this money, this amount is entitled to subsidized food grain, a lot of people will raise up their hands and say, yes, we earn less than that money. So it's not a surprising thing that you've ended up creating a huge set of targeted beneficiaries, mainly because you've used the poverty line in a very wrong manner.
Okay, so Nitin, let me just pose this to you, because you said, okay, we do need a food security bill for India, but it has to be administered in an honest and fair way. So what is your vision for feeding the hungry in India?
No, I don't think we need this food security bill in this manner at all.
Okay, so what are you suggesting?
If you look at what has happened, what we have in India is today quasi-liberalization of the agricultural sector. Mr. Sharma will probably add more into this later. We have an agricultural sector that is not liberalized. Farmers are forced to be farmers. Farmers can't sell their produce to whoever they wish. Farmers cannot improve the kind of crops they grow because there are a whole lot of government controls and regulations which prevent farmers from growing more and exporting the food when they need to. Now, when you have a whole lot of supply constraints like this, you have a whole lot of related problems like rural poverty. You have problems like rural underdevelopment and so forth. Now, instead of liberalizing the economy and allowing farmers to sell into the common Indian market and to the global markets, we've gone in and created this instrument called food security, which a lot of people with good intentions will probably support, but is entirely the wrong way of going about helping the deprived and the needy and to lift themselves out of poverty.
Sure. Okay. Take that point. Community. What's the community adding to this, Malika?
Well, they're listening to what Nitin just said, and they listen to what other guests said. But one of the prevailing themes of things that I'm seeing online is a tweet like this from Waris, who says, "I don't find a reason why we should criticize the food security bill if even a percentage of people get a day food with the bill. What's that?" And there's another tweet here saying, "I have to agree with Mr. Mandar Harsh. While working out more sustainable models, poor people need to eat." So Devinder, you hear these two tweets, people are saying, what's the big deal? At least some people will be allowed to eat that weren't before.
Absolutely. Well, there is no doubt about it. That's what I'm saying. That is what India requires. We need to address the issue of food security, and we definitely need to ensure that nobody sleeps hungry. But what I'm saying is the way forward is not by as I said earlier, the refugee sentiment or the refugee mentality that we have to provide everyone 5 kilos of wheat or rice or whatever, and we think that the problem is solved for posterity. It will not be solved. It has to be addressed by intersectoral, looking at those sectors, because unless you try to prop up agriculture, unless you try to ensure that the 600 million people who are in agriculture, these are the people who are not only going to be beneficiary of the food security system, but they should also be growing food first of all. So I think what we need is local production, local procurement, and local distribution, so that we can address the issue of hunger right in where it is existing. So my way of looking at it would be what if you allow me to say, if you look at this book, The Idealist, which is about Jeffrey Sachs, I think that's one way to understand how we can address hunger. His million village project in Africa. Africa, of course, you can also feed the way you are going to feed India by providing 5 kilo or 10 kilo of food to every hungry African. But what he has gone about is trying to build up the capacity in those villages. Those 100 million, the million projects that he has, actually is trying to build up that capacity in the villages so that you can address hunger in a way that you become self-sustaining. You cannot be dependent for all times to come. I think that is why I'm saying that the bill in India has failed to actually draw out that kind of mechanism. And I would say that is why we will perhaps fail to make hunger history. And that's very disappointing.
So I have 2 dates in mind. I have April of next year, which is when the food security bill actually comes into play. It's already been rolling out, but officially April of next year. May of next year, elections. So Harsh, even though you worked on this bill, you explained why it's so critical for India and important. April and May, they're very, very much linked. And so people are just saying, well, this is just political opportunism. How do you respond to that?
Yeah. See, a lot of things have been said. I mean, I think the timing of the bill was wrong. I feel, we had drafted it about 3 years ago. I think we should have gone much earlier before the election so that we could have ironed out a lot of the difficulties, the questions that have been raised about identifying who is poor, working, strengthening the systems in order to make sure it happens. But the point that Mr. Devinder Sharma is making is suggesting that there's some kind of an either or. Either we ensure that food is distributed to a much larger number of people. And the food security bill is not just about the public distribution system. I think the much more important part of it is ensuring universal maternity entitlements for the first time in this country for people in the unorganized sector, for women. Having the opportunity to rest and breastfeed their child for 6 months, which never was there before. It's about school meals, it's about infant child feeding. But most of all, it is about a legal constitutional duty of the state to ensure that no one sleeps hungry. But all of this is not to the exclusion of many other things that need to be done. Of course, agriculture needs to be strengthened, and a lot of what Mr. Devinder Sharma has been talking about. We need to have a more sustainable agricultural package, but also malnutrition needs other things. It needs, addressing sanitation. Robert Chambers and other experts are saying that the real problem is
we're right at the back. We're right at the end of this main show. Thank you very much for reminding us why the food security bill was actually there in the first place. This conversation is not close to being over. Malika, what are the online community saying?
I'm going to leave us with a little cliffhanger for the post show. There's this Facebook post from Joey who says, of course, this is a political gimmick, but in the long run, it alleviates poverty. But will the government be able to afford what they promised in the long run? I'll have to answer that in a bit.
Okay, and you know where to find that answer at stream.aljazeera.com. In the post show, just have time to tell you though about the next AJ stream. It's the most dangerous place for environmentalists. So we look at why Latin America experiences more violence against green activists than any other region in the world. Stay with us, the post show is next at stream.aljazeera.com. We'll see you online. Thanks for watching. We go back to that cliffhanger. Okay. Yes, we're going back to the cliffhanger. You can hear us planning what we're doing in the post show, and you're already in it. Welcome back. It's good to have you. We are continuing our debate on India's food security bill. Now, just before the end of the main show, you did pose a question. Just can you remind us, Malika?
I definitely will. This was a question posed on Facebook from Joey, who says, it's a political gimmick, but in the long run, it will alleviate poverty. But will the government be able to afford what they promised? And I think that's a good question to pose to you, Manny.
Yeah. Well, in the long run, it will certainly work. Whether it is a political instrument or not, well, it is a catalyst for change nevertheless.
Well, you said it'll definitely work. You tell us why. You haven't really convinced me.
Yeah. Well, as a starter, this particular bill will help some people, and as the chinks in the armor come out, probably amendments can be made and budgetary allocations can also be drafted in to add other cereals, eggs, and other protein-based components. I would believe that.
Do you know what occurred to me was that this is a very bourgeois conversation, but it's really about people in India who need the most help and the most support. So, Harsh, as you were doing your research and prepping for this legislation, what were you hearing for the people who this bill is supposed to be helping? What were their voices like? What were they saying?
No, I think that, firstly, just if I could just come in briefly about affording it, I think the important question is to ask, firstly, whether we can afford not to have it. What are the costs of every second child being malnourished? It means that every second person coming into the demographic dividend that India is achieving, it doesn't have their brains and bodies formed to full potential. So I think that the cost of not of persisting malnutrition of the levels that India has is both a humanitarian and ethical challenge, but it is also a great economic liability. And people are talking about, if they have the security of basic food, if your cereals are affordable, you have more money in your hand to spend on other things, and you have a certain security to be able to look forward to the world with more morale.
This is really important. Again, we're going back to our bourgeois argument. So the people on the ground, the people who this bill is supposed to be helping, what are their voices saying? Can you give us a sense of that? I feel they're missing from this conversation. Harsh.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I, as part of the Right to Food campaign, talking to people on the ground, I think the public distribution system, which some people are so dismissive of, or the school meal program, or ICDS, the small child feeding, are critically important for people on the ground, because it gives them, it is something that they want to see strengthened. They recognize that their problems of corruption, their problems of unaccountable government. And as we have seen with the right to education and the right to information and the employment guarantee, that that passing a law is not going to end hunger tomorrow or change things dramatically. But people, once they have a legal right, they see something, the possibilities of improvement over time.
Manny, we didn't quite catch you. Can you repeat that, please?
Well, it is a catalyst. This particular act can be a catalyst for further activities in the future, and every law is not cast in stone. The analysts over here are commenting that this particular legislation is absolutely cast in stone, but it can be a stepping stone for the future as well. It surely can be that.
Malika.
He mentioned
what I feel is when I listen to people like Mr. Mandar, he's so nice about it, and I think he's genuinely concerned about people who are underprivileged and who deserve help. Unfortunately, what happens is that the methods which Mr. Mandar and his colleagues used, both for this right and the whole set of other entitlements that they rolled out as part of the National Advisory Council, are wholly wrong. The reason is, like for example, Mr. Mandar just mentioned that what are the costs of not having the food security bill, but what he actually told you were the costs of malnutrition. Now it is quite a jump to equate a piece of legislation which they've introduced with the problem called malnutrition in the first place. Now, I think we've got to remember that in the whole of India, there are just 30 million people who pay income tax. The tax base, the income tax base of the country is just about 30 million people. Now, every additional person you give an entitlement to is taking away a rupee in tax from a person who's earned it working very hard. Now, these are not exactly the richest people who only pay tax. There are a lot of income earners who are borderline low income earners who actually pay tax. They may pay direct tax through income tax, or they might pay indirect tax through value-added tax and the other things. Now, when tax rates rise up, what you're doing is you're actually creating disincentives for people who work very hard to earn a living and who strive for themselves and improve their lot. Now, what we have to remember is not just that the people who deserve help at the bottommost rung of the income ladder, but also the people who are working day in and day out, making use of the economic opportunities out there to lift themselves and their families and their communities out of poverty. Now, it's not only a question of helping, like one of those viewers said, oh, so what if X percentage of the people, so what if the government gives gives entitlement, at least someone doesn't sleep poor. But that kilo of rice costs money, and that money doesn't grow on trees. It is actually taken as tax from people who work very hard for a living.
Sure.
And I think there is a very
Let me just interject, because we're close to the end of the program, and I really get your point very clearly. Some people may say this is a very selfish argument that you're putting forward. Let me just bring in Malika, because I know the community also want to join in. Devinder, I know you want to jump into, but just hold tight for a moment.
Well, Devinder, I'm actually going to pose this one to you because someone agrees with an argument you made a little bit earlier in the show. Caroline on Twitter says, start teaching Indians to grow their own food, use their climate to their advantage. There's also a video comment here from another person who is skeptical. Have a listen to this and let me know what you think after.
The bill provides about 5 kilograms of food grain per person at fixed prices through ration shops in the country. But nutrition reports have said that the average Indian male needs about 14 kilograms of rice and children need about 7. So how effective is the bill going to be when it comes to tackling issues of nutrition? Or is nutrition not really the end goal of this bill?
So Devinder, is nutrition not the end result or end goal of this bill, as she says?
Well, I think those people who drafted the bill did not see beyond malnutrition and beyond that kind of people who need immediate attention or need emergency aid. I think that is where the folly is. But having said that, I think what is more important is we need to understand that bill cannot be seen in isolation. It has to be seen in the context of other policies that have been designed. On the one hand, we have the government of India pushing farmers out of agriculture. On the other hand, we want to produce more food in the days to come. I think there's a contradiction here which is very clear. So in the years to come, we're going to have more hungry people, because those people who are being pushed out of agriculture are somehow not going to join the manufacturing sector as is expected by many people, as of course in the last 10 years we have seen. Now, which means we'll have more people who will be without jobs or without anything to do, and they will be dependent upon the doles that the government of India is providing. I think that's why I'm saying there has to be intersectoral aspect should have been seen, should have been viewed, to develop a kind of a policy which would sustainable for the long term. Now this, as somebody said earlier, somebody asked a question, in the long term it is going to remove poverty. I think no. On the other hand, in the short term it might address the political issue of the ruling party getting into power again, if at all it plays its card very well. But otherwise, I don't think it is an answer to India's hunger crisis for all times to come. And I think, as I said earlier, we need to produce food. We need to enable our people to produce food so that they can address their own hunger. Now, one thing I'd like to add here, we have 650,000 villages in India. Those villages, why is it that in that village where people are producing food which is being marketed outside, people are living in hunger in the same village? Now that is why I'm saying we need to have a self-land system in a village or in a block or in a cluster of villages where that hunger issue could have been addressed, which means those 650,000 villages should be outside the gamut of hunger in a couple of years from now, if we had done really a good job. Now that is why the National Advisory Council, I think, failed miserably to look beyond the malnourished population or the population of people who need emergency aid. And I think that is something which the country will realize after a few years at least.
So I've been listening, gentlemen, to the critiques for the food security bill and also for the reasons why it is a good idea for India right now. But Harsh, what happens in May if the Congress party don't win the next election? What happens to the food security bill, do you think?
See, I think that the food, I just, before I come in there, I felt I must respond to Nitin. Hardworking people are not just those who pay taxes and who pay direct taxes. India's tax to GDP ratio is very low, and there's a much greater scope to tax people. And much of our tax is indirect taxes, which is from the poor. And the poor work very hard, and so I think that this discourse about hardworking people being taxed to feed the poor as being unjust is an extremely problematic one. I think we do need to tax people much more and use it wisely and use it to build a more humane and just society. The ethical and political reasons and economic reasons. The elections, it's come too close to the elections. I think governments are racing to try to do some kind of implementation without actual identification, actually putting the systems in place. I think that the real benefits of this law are actually going to be seen after the elections, when
is that regardless of whichever party actually becomes the ruling party?
Regardless of which party.
Interesting.
Because there is now a bipartisan support for it.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, gentlemen, I'm going to thank you, but while I thank you, I'm going to leave our audience who are watching with a cartoon that gives you some of the idea of the skepticism surrounding the food security bill. But while you look at that, I can also thank Devinder Sharma. He's from the Food and Trade. He's a food and trade policy analyst. Nitin Pai is a director of Takshashila Institution. Harsh Manda, who you heard just there, is director of the Center for Equity Studies, and Mani Shankar Prasad is a blogger, and he's also an environmental and social consultant. Gentlemen, it's been great having you here on the stream. Thank you very much for being part of this conversation. So, you ready for tomorrow?
I'm always ready.
Wednesday's show is intriguing. Okay, so where is the most dangerous place for environmentalists, would you think? Would you pick Latin America? Well, apparently it experiences more violence against green activists than any other region in the world. Malika and I and the community will be looking into that in more detail on the next AJ stream. But for now, you'll find us online at stream.aljazeera.com. Thanks for watching. Take care.